Your father left because you weren't worth staying for, my sister Victoria whispered to my 8-year-old son Marcus at my parents' Thanksgiving table, her voice pitched low enough that the adults around us would end here but loud enough to devastate a child who still cried himself to sleep missing his daddy. Some kids are just too difficult to love. That's why he chose to leave you. I didn't hear her say it. I was in the kitchen helping my mother with the turkey, but I found my son 10 minutes later locked in the bathroom sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe, repeating words that no child should ever have to process. But why did I already have evidence of my sister's cruelty prepared for this moment? And why did my father's face go pale when I placed my late husband's final letter on the table in front of everyone? Read it, I said to Victoria. Read what Daniel wrote about you before he died. The room fell silent. 14 family members stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped breathing. This isn't the time, my father said, reaching for the letter. We're having a nice holiday. 8 years was long enough. I pulled the letter back from his reach. My son is in the bathroom crying because your daughter told him his father didn't love him enough to stay alive. If there was ever a time, it's now. Victoria's face had gone white. She knew what was in that letter, or at least, she suspected. I don't know what he's talking about, she said quickly. I didn't say anything. He's 8, Victoria. He repeated exactly what you told him. Word for word. Your father left because you weren't worth staying for. Some kids are just too difficult to love. My voice was steady despite the rage trembling through me. You said that to my child. About his dead father. At Thanksgiving dinner. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then my mother spoke. Victoria, what did you say to Marcus? The truth about my husband's death was something I'd protected my family from for 8 years. Daniel had died by suicide when Marcus was 3 months old. The official story, the one I'd told everyone, including my son, was that Daddy had been very sick. And sometimes when people are very sick, they can't stay with us no matter how much they want to. It was a gentle version of an ugly truth. What I hadn't shared was why Daniel had reached the breaking point. What had pushed him from struggling to drowning? What had happened in the months before his death that had made him believe we'd be better off without him? Victoria had happened. My sister had been in love with Daniel before I ever met him. They dated briefly in college, a relationship that had ended when Daniel realized Victoria's charm masked something controlling and cruel. He'd broken up with her as gently as possible, but Victoria didn't accept rejection. She'd spent years afterward trying to reconnect, to rekindle what she insisted was their meant-to-be romance. Then I'd met Daniel at a work conference. We'd fallen in love. We'd gotten married. And Victoria had never forgiven either of us. The campaign had started subtly. Comments at family gatherings. Daniel, do you ever think about what might have been? We were so good together. Emails I wasn't supposed to see. I know you settled for my sister because I wasn't available. It's not too late to fix that mistake. Phone calls she'd make when she knew I was busy. Remember how we used to talk for hours? Your wife doesn't understand you like I do. Daniel had handled it with patience at first, ignoring her messages, deflecting her comments, trying to maintain family peace for my sake. But Victoria was relentless. The pregnancy had made everything worse. When I announced I was expecting Marcus, something in Victoria had snapped. The child I was carrying was proof that Daniel had chosen me permanently, had built a life with me that couldn't be undone. Her tactics escalated. She began showing up at Daniel's workplace, forcing him into uncomfortable public encounters. She sent letters to our home describing intimate details from their college relationship, ensuring I would see them and be hurt. She created fake social media profiles to send him messages that grew increasingly desperate. She needs help, Daniel told me after I found one particularly disturbing letter. This isn't normal jealousy. This is obsession. I'll talk to my parents. They won't believe you. They never believe anything negative about Victoria. He was right. I'd tried once, years earlier, to explain Victoria's behavior. My parents had dismissed it as sibling rivalry, as me being too sensitive, as misunderstanding Victoria's affectionate nature toward Daniel. They'd chosen to believe the version of their daughter they preferred. The final months of Daniel's life were marked by Victoria's relentless pressure and his deteriorating mental health. Daniel had struggled with depression before we met, something he'd been open about, something we'd managed together with therapy and medication. The stability of our marriage, the joy of expecting our child, had kept him healthy for years. Victoria's campaign destroyed that stability. She began telling people that Daniel was having an affair with her, a lie that reached our social circles and forced us into exhausting denial and explanation. She showed up at my baby's shower, drunk and tearful, declaring that Daniel was making a mistake he'd regret forever. The stress fractured something in Daniel's carefully maintained mental health. I'm drowning, he told me one night, 2 weeks before Marcus was born. She won't stop. And your family won't acknowledge what she's doing. I feel like I'm going insane. We can move. We can cut contact completely. She'll follow. She's made that clear. She says if I won't be with her, she'll make sure I can't be happy with anyone. Daniel's therapist increased his medication. I arranged for us to move to a new city after the baby came. We made plans that we believed would protect us. But Victoria found ways to poison even our escape. 3 days after Marcus was born, while I was still in the hospital recovering from a difficult delivery, Victoria visited Daniel at our home. I don't know exactly what she said. Daniel never told me, and Victoria has never admitted to being there. But I know she was there because the doorbell camera recorded her arrival and departure, 97 minutes during which something changed in my husband irrevocably. Daniel died by suicide 2 weeks later. He left 3 letters. One for me, filled with love and apology and explanations I'd read 1,000 times. One for Marcus, to be given when he was old enough, explaining that Daddy's death was never his fault. And one for Victoria. The letter to Victoria was something I'd never shown anyone. I'd found it sealed, addressed to her, in Daniel's belongings after his death. I'd debated for weeks whether to deliver it, ultimately deciding that she deserved to read whatever final words Daniel had written. But I'd read it first. And I'd made a copy. The letter was 4 pages of documentation. Every inappropriate contact she'd made. Every boundary she'd violated. Every escalation that had contributed to his breakdown. Daniel had written it as evidence, as proof of what she'd done, in case something happened to him. I know you'll try to rewrite history, he'd written at the end. You'll make yourself the victim, make me the villain, make Vivian the obstacle. But I'm documenting the truth so someone will know what really happened. You pursued me for years after I made clear I wasn't interested. You harassed my wife throughout her pregnancy. You came to my home 3 days after my son was born and told me things I see ain't repeat, things that made me question my sanity, my choices, my right to be happy. Whatever happens next, I want someone to know that you were the catalyst. Not the only cause. I own my mental illness, but the match that ignited a fire I couldn't put out. I'd given Victoria the original letter at Daniel's funeral. She'd read it privately, then returned to me with tears streaming down her face. He was confused, she'd said. His illness made him paranoid. None of this is true. The doorbell camera footage of your visit is true. I was checking on him. Being a good sister-in-law. You were there for 97 minutes. What did you say to him, Victoria? She'd never answered. She'd walked away, and we'd never spoken of Daniel's death directly again. The 8 years since had been marked by Victoria's ongoing cruelty toward Marcus. She'd never accepted that Daniel had loved me, married me, had a child with me. My son was living proof of everything she'd lost, and she punished him for it at every opportunity. He looks just like his father, she'd say with an edge that made the words feel like accusations. Such a shame he'll never know Daniel. Some bonds can't be replaced. Does he ever ask why his daddy left? Children need to understand these things eventually. I'd kept Marcus away from her as much as possible, limiting family contact to major holidays, supervising every interaction. But I couldn't be everywhere at once. And Victoria was patient. Thanksgiving had seemed safe. 14 people at the table, constant activity, adults everywhere. What could she possibly do in such a crowded setting? But Victoria was skilled at finding moments. While I was in the kitchen, while my mother was distracted, while my father was watching football, she'd found her opportunity. 8 words to an 8-year-old boy. Your father left because you weren't worth staying for. 8 years of accumulated cruelty, concentrated into a single devastating sentence. I found Marcus in the bathroom, curled against the wall, his body shaking with sobs. Mommy, Aunt Vicky says Daddy didn't love me. She says I was too hard to love and that's why he went away. I gathered him into my arms, holding him against my chest while my heart shattered and my rage ignited. That's not true, sweetheart. That's not true at all. But she said. She was wrong. Daddy loved you so much. He was sick, sweetheart, sick in a way that made it hard for him to stay, even though he wanted to more than anything. Then why did he leave? Because sometimes when people are sick, they can't see how loved they are. It wasn't about you. It was never about you. I held him until his sobs slowed, until his breathing steadied, until he could look at me with red-rimmed eyes and the desperate need to believe what I was telling him. I have something to show you, I said. Something Daddy wrote. Not today, you're not ready today. But soon. He wrote you a letter explaining everything, telling you how much he loved you. Would you like to read it when you're feeling better? He nodded. Then that's what we'll do. But right now, I need you to wait here while I talk to the grown-ups. Can you do that for me? Another nod. I kissed his forehead, stood, and walked back to the dining room. I was done protecting Victoria from the truth. The letter I placed on the table was my copy of Daniel's final words to Victoria. 14 family members watched as I smoothed the pages in front of my sister. Read it out loud, I said. Vivian, this isn't appropriate, my mother started. Your daughter just told my 8-year-old son that his father died because he wasn't worth loving. What's appropriate about any of this? I'm sure Victoria didn't mean. She meant exactly what she said. She has been tormenting my son for 8 years because she can't accept that Daniel chose me over her. This letter documents exactly what she did to my husband before he died. What she did? My father's voice carried an edge of warning. Daniel was mentally ill. Daniel was mentally ill and being stalked by your daughter. Both things can be true. I pointed at the letter. Read it, Victoria. Let everyone hear what Daniel actually thought about you. Victoria's hands were shaking as she picked up the pages. I'm not reading this. It's private. It was addressed to you. You've had the original for 8 years. This is just a copy. I looked around the table. Daniel wrote this letter in case he didn't survive his depression. He wanted documentation of what drove him to the breaking point. He was paranoid. He had doorbell camera footage of your visit 3 days after Marcus was born. He had copies of your emails and letters. He had witness statements from coworkers who saw you showing up at his office. I kept my voice steady. He wasn't paranoid. He was being harassed by a woman who couldn't accept that he didn't want her. The silence at the table was absolute. My mother looked between Victoria and me with an expression I couldn't read: confusion, denial, the first cracks of recognition. Victoria, is any of this true? Of course not. Daniel and I were friends. Close friends. His illness made him misinterpret. You dated him in college, my father said slowly. Before he met Vivian. For a few months. It was nothing. You told me once that he was the one who got away. That if circumstances had been different. My mother's voice trailed off. That doesn't mean I stalked him. It means you had feelings that persisted after he married your sister. My father's expression was shifting, the denial giving way to something more uncomfortable. Victoria, what did you say to Marcus today? The room waited. Victoria looked around at faces that were no longer automatically aligned with her, at family members who were questioning for the first time the narrative she'd maintained for years. I told him the truth. The truth? That his father chose to leave. That children can be burdens that push people away. That, you told an 8-year-old that his father died because he wasn't worth loving. My voice was ice. That's not truth. That's cruelty designed to hurt a child because you can't hurt me directly anymore. You took everything from me. Daniel, the life we should have had. Daniel left you in college. You didn't have a life together. You had a fantasy you refused to release, and you punished him for not sharing it. He would have come back to me if you hadn't. He wrote a 4-page letter documenting your harassment before he killed himself. Does that sound like a man who would have come back to you? The confrontation I'd avoided for 8 years finally erupted. Everything I'd kept silent about, every accommodation I'd made to preserve family peace, every injustice I'd swallowed to protect Marcus from conflict, all of it came pouring out. You showed up at my baby shower drunk. You told our mutual friends we were having an affair. You sent letters to our home describing sexual encounters you'd had in college, knowing I would see them and be hurt. You came to our house 3 days after my son was born, while I was still in the hospital, and said something to Daniel that broke whatever remaining resilience he had. I was trying to help. You were trying to destroy my marriage. And when that failed, you settled for destroying my husband. Tears were streaming down my face now, but my voice remained steady. He loved Marcus. He loved me. He wanted to live, to raise his son, to build the family we'd planned. But you made his life unbearable, and he couldn't see a way out that didn't involve ending everything. I didn't make him. His letter says otherwise. His therapist's notes, which I obtained after his death, document the escalating stress caused by persistent unwanted contact from a family member. The doorbell camera shows you entering our home 3 days before he died and staying for over an hour. I was shaking now. I don't know exactly what you said. I'll never know. But I know you were the last person he chose to see before he made his final decision. That's not coincidence. My mother was crying. My father sat frozen, processing information that contradicted everything he'd believed about his daughter. The other family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, watched with expressions ranging from shock to horror to dawning recognition. I knew something was wrong, my Aunt Patricia said quietly. At the baby shower. The way Victoria acted, I knew it wasn't normal. I should have said something. We all should have said something, my uncle added. We just didn't want to make waves. The waves were already there, I said. You just chose not to see them. Because seeing them would have meant acknowledging that Victoria isn't who she pretends to be. Victoria stood abruptly, knocking her chair backward. I don't have to listen to this. I'm being attacked based on the delusions of a dead man and the bitterness of a widow who never deserved him. Sit down. My father's voice carried authority I hadn't heard in years. You're not leaving until we understand what happened. Dad. Sit down. Victoria sat. The next 2 hours were the most painful of my life, and possibly of everyone present. I shared everything. Daniel's letter. The emails and messages Victoria had sent. The doorbell camera footage. The therapist's notes that documented his deterioration. The correlation between Victoria's escalating behavior and Daniel's declining mental health. My parents, confronted with evidence they couldn't deny, began to crack open their defensive assumptions about their favored daughter. "We failed you," my mother said finally, looking at me with devastation in her eyes. "We failed Daniel. We failed Marcus." "Yes. You did. We believed Victoria because we wanted to. Because believing her was easier than facing what she'd become." "I know. What do we do now?" "What we did was establish boundaries. Victoria was excluded from family gatherings until she completed therapy and demonstrated genuine change. My parents would no longer invite us to events where she might be present. Communication would go through my father only, with my approval required for any contact. Marcus would receive a full, age-appropriate explanation of his father's death, including the role Victoria had played. Not to create hatred, but to ensure he understood that his father's choice had nothing to do with his worth as a son. Daniel's letter to Marcus, the one he'd written for when his son was old enough, would be shared on Marcus's 9th birthday, carefully, with therapeutic support, as a gift from a father who'd loved him impossibly much. Victoria fought the new reality at first. She sent emails I didn't read. She showed up at my workplace, which resulted in security escorting her out. She called my parents demanding they see reason and restore her position in the family. But the evidence was too comprehensive. Daniel's documentation had been thorough. The pattern of behavior was undeniable once people stopped refusing to see it. Eventually, faced with the choice between isolation and accountability, Victoria entered therapy. The process of genuine change took years. Victoria's first attempts at apology were defensive, focused on her own pain rather than the damage she'd caused. Her therapist helped her understand why these attempts were inadequate. Gradually, painfully, something shifted. "I've spent my whole life believing I was owed things that weren't mine," she told me during one supervised conversation, 3 years after the Thanksgiving confrontation. "Daniel, success, my parents' approval, I thought wanting them was the same as deserving them. And now? Now I understand that what I did to Daniel, to you, to Marcus, it was abuse. I was so focused on what I'd lost that I tried to destroy what you had. And when I couldn't destroy it, I tried to hurt the only remaining evidence that it ever existed. Marcus. Marcus." She was crying real tears, not the performative ones I'd seen for years. "I told an 8-year-old that his father didn't love him. Because I couldn't accept that his father loved someone who wasn't me." "That's accurate. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I'm sorry. The apology wasn't enough to rebuild our relationship. Some damages can't be repaired by words alone." Victoria's cruelty toward Marcus, her role in Daniel's death, the years of harassment that had stolen my husband from me, none of it could be undone by acknowledgement. But the apology was enough to release me from carrying the burden of her accountability. She owned what she'd done now. The family understood. The truth had finally emerged after 8 years of being suppressed. I could focus on Marcus, on healing, on building a life without the constant weight of Victoria's presence. Marcus is 16 now. He's read his father's letter dozens of times. He understands, as much as any teenager can, the complexity of mental illness and the contributing factors that had overwhelmed Daniel's ability to cope. "Dad wasn't weak," he told me recently. "He was fighting something that got too big to fight alone." That's exactly right. And Aunt Victoria made it bigger. Yes. But she didn't make him pull the trigger. That was the illness. Also yes. Both things can be true. I'm glad you told me everything. Some of my friends' parents hide things, and then they find out later and feel betrayed. I'd rather know the truth, even when it's ugly. Your father wanted you to know. He wrote that letter so you'd have his words, his explanation, his love, even after he was gone. Victoria and I maintain minimal contact now. We can be in the same room at major family events, weddings, funerals, significant holidays. We don't seek each other out, but we don't actively avoid each other either. She's married now, to a man who knows her history and has chosen to support her continued growth. She has a daughter of her own, and by all accounts, she's a devoted mother. I hope it lasts. I hope she's genuinely changed. But I no longer make my peace dependent on her choices. The Thanksgiving table where Victoria destroyed my son's understanding of his father's love has hosted many gatherings since. Some holidays, I still think about that day, Marcus's sobs, Victoria's cruelty, the letter that finally exposed the truth. The memories don't hurt the way they used to. They've become markers of a turning point rather than wounds that won't heal. My father told me recently that he thinks about Daniel often. I should have protected him, he said. I saw the warning signs with Victoria and chose to ignore them because facing them was too difficult. Yes. You should have. I'm sorry, Vivian. I know. I'm sorry too, for the years I stayed silent to keep the peace. If I'd spoken up earlier, maybe things would have been different. Or maybe Victoria would have just found other ways to cause damage. Maybe. We'll never know. Daniel's letter sits in a fireproof box in my closet, along with his wedding ring and the last photograph we took together. Sometimes Marcus asks to read it again, and I give it to him without hesitation. It's his connection to a father he barely remembers, a bridge across the years of absence. He really loved us, Marcus always says when he finishes. He really did. I wish I could have known him. Part of him lives in you. The way you laugh. The way you approach problems. The kindness you show people who are struggling. I hold my son, taller than me now, nearly a man. He would be so proud of who you're becoming. She told my 8-year-old son that his father left because he wasn't worth staying for. I found him crying in the bathroom, repeating words that no child should ever have to process. I walked back to that table and placed my husband's final letter in front of everyone, the letter he wrote documenting 8 years of harassment. The letter that explained exactly who had pushed him toward the edge he couldn't step back from. My father said it wasn't the time. But 8 years of silence had only protected the person who destroyed my family. Victoria had pursued my husband since before I met him. She'd escalated when we married, broken when I got pregnant, and visited our home 3 days after Marcus was born to say something that shattered Daniel's remaining will to live. The truth didn't fix anything, you can't repair what's been destroyed. But the truth set me free from carrying her secret. And my son finally understood that his father's death was never about him. It was about illness, and obsession, and a woman who couldn't accept that love doesn't come on demand.